Reporting from the Catskills, and we're going to learn together the 6th chapter of the laws of Mikvaot, in the very interesting halachas about different ways. We've been learning about how a mikvah is made. Once the mikvah has its 40 saw, its original 40 saw necessary for it to be a kosher mikvah, it can't really be disqualified. Any water you add into it, it just becomes nullified to the kosher water for the mikvah, and then the water becomes good. But before it had its 40 saw, we're very, very careful of how the water gets in. Make sure that there's no real human intervention, no major human intervention of drawn waters, which would disqualify the original 40 saw of the mikvah. So that's what we're learning inside. So here we go. Halacha Aleph. We're going to talk about if the water, as it went and it's made its way into the mikvah, if the waters, as they made their way down into the mikvah, the waters touch different vessels, will that disqualify the mikvah depending on the vessels? Kol hakelim hamekablim. All vessels that have a receptacle. So again, because vessels that don't have receptacles, they're not, the water is going into a not made vessel. So it's not really considered a vessel, and then the water hasn't been handled. But vessels that have receptacles, which the water is filling up a vessel with the receptacles, so it would be kind of like the water was handled in some way. So that the waters went on these vessels, or they fell. Okay, so the water went on them, or the waters fell into them. These waters are considered handled waters, drawn waters. A place that's a mikveh, they disqualify the mikveh. So if the water on the way to get to the mikveh somehow went on vessels that have receptacles, the water is considered drawn, handled water. The Kabbalah, this is all if the waters that the vessels that the waters went on are made in order to be a receptacle and to have some of the waters on it. I feel like even if these vessels were not vessels that they themselves become impure. Could go in kliyavonim, like for example, if a vessel itself is made out of stone, or it's made out of earth, out of dirt, it doesn't matter. I don't care about the vessel, if the vessel's impure or not impure. That's not my problem here. My question is, were these waters handled waters by human? If it's went on a vessel, I don't care what the vessel's made out of. It has a receptacle, and on its way to the mikvah goes through such a vessel, that is going to make the waters considered handled waters, and that will disqualify the waters from being good, kosher for the mikvah because they were handled. Halacha 2. What happens if the vessels were not made to be receptacles for the water to go in? If were vessels that weren't made to receive any kind of liquid in it, even though the vessel has some way that it could be a receptacle, so it's not designed and made and crafted for it to be a receptacle, but it's a natural way that it grows. For example, we'll see now in a place of mikvah, if it's not made to be a receptacle, it does not going to nullify the mikvah, even though it has a receptacle in it. What's an example the Rambam says of something that has a receptacle, but it's not made for it? You're going to see loinos, like the large pipes. These large pipes, and large pipes are usually made for the water not to be a receptacle, and then the pipes are to move the water on, right? If you have drainage pipes or different pipes, you're not interested in the water gathering. You want to move water to go in on one side and go on the other side. That the waters go through these large pipes. So sometimes these pipes, what happens is they're narrower in the beginning, and then they become thicker in the middle, then they become narrower again. Now, what could happen is your goal really is just get this liquid through from one end to the other. It doesn't really want to be a receptacle and hold the water in it, but because there's larger sections to this pipe in the middle, the water will kind of gather there and be some kind of receptacle and place it as a mikvah. That won't disqualify the mikvah, because although there is a receptacle there, it's not, you don't want pipes to be receptacles, and therefore it won't disqualify the water. It won't be considered handled, and it'll just go through to the mikvah, and it'll be kosher for the mikvah. Whether they're made out of earthenware, they're made out of metal, I don't care what the material that the pipe is made out of, it is kosher. Halacha number 3. What about another kind of example of the above case where there's natural receptacles but unintended? Somebody had natural holes in rocks. So again, there was a rock there in the water. Imagine it's raining, the water's going on a mountain, and there's a big hole, natural hole in the mountain. There's a natural hole in the rock. But again, you didn't make that rock or the hole in the mountain to be a receptacle, but it is somehow being a receptacle to the water. But those things that are not specifically made to be receptacles will not disqualify the mikvah. If she'enan kli, because They're not vessels. They're part of the earth. They're part of the rocks. They're naturally made. But let's say you had a receptacle, you had a cup, and you said, look what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this cup, I'm going to screw it in and attach it, basela, to a rock. So now the rock, I'm saying, is natural. And by screwing, you're hoping that by screwing in your cup, your receptacle, your vessel to a rock, it'll kind of make the vessels take on the status of what it's screwed into to the rock. Doesn't matter. You had a receptacle, it's still a receptacle, even if you screwed it into a rock. Placeless a mikvah, makes the mikvah, the waters that went on that receptacle will make the mikvah not kosher. Even if you connected it to a rock with cement, with you cemented it into a thing that's not a receptacle, since your item was originally a receptacle, it stays a receptacle, and the water that's going to go in and is going to be considered disqualified. Nikva milamata. But here, what happens if you kind of have a receptacle, a vessel, and you want to destroy it? You want to say, listen, I want to mess it up so that the water won't be considered a real vessel. Nikva milamata, so you made a hole in on this receptacle on bottom, I mean, on the side, as long as that hole that you made is the size of 2 fingers. Shveres hanoid is like, we have the yogurts the kids drink from, like it comes in, it's the mouthpiece of a drinking pouch. The kids, so they have those like pouch yogurts and they drink from it. So as long as it's the size of that hole, which is 2 fingers, and now because that destroys the vessel, it's not really a good receptacle anymore because it has too big of a hole. So as long as the bottom of that receptacle has a big hole on the bottom or on the side, Shera, it is kosher. The Ein Pesalis is a mikveh, and the water that went through it is not considered handled because it never went in a real receptacle, because the receptacle has too big of a hole to be used as a legit receptacle because of the holes that it has. Now he goes on to talk about those halachas. What are this last point? That, okay, so water that's handled by a receptacle, not kosher for a mikveh because it's considered handled, and water is not allowed to be handled by a human being. But what happens if there were holes? So how big does a hole in a vessel have to be to ruin a hole? It goes back to a halacha we learned in the previous laws of the Rambam. What was the halacha we learned in the previous rules of the Rambam? It depends what the vessel was made for, how big that hole has to be. So in other words, if this vessel is made to hold pomegranates, and the hole is the size of an olive, it can still hold pomegranates, and the vessel is still a good vessel. If the vessel is made to hold olives and it has a hole the size of an olive, then the olive then it can't hold olives anymore, and then the receptacle is destroyed. So really, it depends on what was the original intent of the basket, of the box, or whatever you have over here. The receptacle, if it's made for liquid, then the hole could be very small, because liquid goes out very easily. So how big does the hole have to be to ruin the receptacle, that when the rainwater goes in it, it's not considered a receptacle and it's not considered handled because the receptacle has too big of a hole? So he says, well, it depends on the vessel. Let's see. If you take a very large vessel, it's like a barrel. You have a large, huge barrel, a big barrel, or you have a kneading trough. In the olden days, this was a big vessel. It seems like they would knead the dough. When they would make the dough, they had a big bowl, a big thing. It's called a kneading trough for the dough, and they would knead the dough in that kneading trough. So and there became a hole. So nekaf large enough hole in order to make the vessel not be good enough to hold any more dough, or to hold what the barrel usually holds, the kavi ba'aretz, and then you screwed it in, you attached it to the ground. So mikveh, and you took that barrel itself and you made it into a mikveh. Hareza kosher, it's kosher. So in other words, a regular mikveh in a barrel is no good. So it had a very large barrel. The guy says, look, I need a mikveh. I'm going somewhere. I need a mikveh with me. I'm traveling on vacation somewhere, and there's no mikveh where I'm going. Let me take a massive barrel, and I'll have rainwater fill it up. Now, naturally, that barrel wouldn't be kosher because it's a vessel. You can't make a mikveh out of a vessel. So what is his trick? He's going to make a hole in the barrel, and then he's going to attach it to the ground, so it'll be part of the ground. Now it could be a kosher mikveh, but he had to destroy that it should be a vessel by making a large enough hole from what that barrel was made for, so it shouldn't be a vessel anymore, so that now it's a kosher mikveh. So he says, and then even if he then took the hole and filled it up with a sid, sid is a line. Where am I holding over here? Or he attached it to a building. It's not, the barrel still has a hole. He didn't cover it up with the right plug that you're supposed to plug the hole. So the barrel is not considered a good receptacle. It's not disqualifying the vessel. It's still not considered a vessel. It's not. He didn't build it back correctly enough that it's back to the original vessel. And the water that's inside the barrel is considered a kosher mikvah because, again, the original barrel has a big enough hole and it wasn't stuffed and filled up the hole with the right substance, and therefore it could be kosher for a mikvah. Stami beseed, oy begaf sees, adayin hu paisel. But if you did it with the right kind of material, lime or gypsum, which is the right kind of material to close at the barrel, and it's back to being good. The barrel, adayin hu paisel is a mikvah. It's no good. It's going to puzzle, make no good your mikvah. Chikben about it. So yivna, unless the other option to do is if he attaches that barrel into the ground, or he builds it part of fixes it to a wall. So now the barrel is not a barrel anymore. It's a barrel that's affixed to a wall, or it's part of the ground. So imagine, let's say he dug a hole in the ground and stuck this barrel in, or cemented it into the ground, that the barrel now becomes part of the ground. It's almost like you want to say like an indoor pool, like you made it into, it's not considered a utensil anymore. It's considered like an in-ground pool or attached to the ground. And now it's not a vessel anymore, and therefore it can be kosher for a mikvah. Or if he put it on the earth, placed it on the surface of the earth with lime or mud, so he kind of really attached it to the ground, cemented it into the ground in a way that it's connected to the ground, it's kosher again because it's attached to the ground, it's part of the ground, and therefore that barrel could be a kosher mikvah. I guess these are ways that one could take a jacuzzi with them, a movable jacuzzi, attach it into the ground somehow using these ways, making a hole in a jacuzzi, or that the water would come out, or attaching it to the ground in certain ways. And they could take this, get rainwater in it perhaps, and don't do this halakhically. This is an idea of how one would perhaps make a mikvah when they were traveling somewhere to a distance that did not have a mikvah. Halacha hey. Now he's going to talk about a very interesting case. We'll see this. So this is, first of all, this is a tray. So what happens if somebody has a tray, and the water, again, imagine a chabaras. Now we're building the mikvah. We need to get the rainwater from the roof into the mikvah so that we have kosher mikvah. So what he did was he took a tray and allowed the water coming off, to lean the rainwater, to get the rainwater into the mikvah. And here he has a pipe. So imagine he has a drainage pipe coming off the roof, and he wants to get that rainwater into the mikvah. So he puts a tavla, either you call it a tablet or let's call it a tray, is maybe a better word to understand it. Takes a tray. So the water comes down from your rain drain pipe, comes onto your tray, your tablet, yard of the mikvah, and then that angles it in to go into the mikvah. And so this tray, you could have a tray that has a little bit of a lip around the top of it. If the tray has this tablet has a doif and has a little bit of a lip, a wall, this is now considered a receptacle because it is a tray with walls. It's like a vessel that has a receptacle, and that will disqualify all that water that's going to the mikvah. It's considered handled water because it went through a vessel. But if it doesn't have lips to the tray, then it's just a flat, flat thing. It's not a receptacle, and the water is not traveling on a receptacle, and therefore it's not considered handled, and it's kosher. But if you put the tray under the why was your point that you put the tray under the water coming out of the pipe, out of your drain pipe? Because you wanted to clean it. You weren't actually intending specifically to have the water go into the mikvah. You were just trying to clean it. So you put it under the drain pipe, let it get clean from the rainwater. And even though it has a lip, it has a wall around it, and it doesn't disqualify the mikvah. Also the Kabbalah, because this whole point of putting this tray, putting this tablet under the drain pipe wasn't to slant the water into the mikvah, it was something to clean it, and therefore it wasn't intentional, therefore it's not considered handled, and that water won't disqualify your mikvah. Halacha number 6. Now he goes into an interesting question. So you have this pipe. Now in the old, I guess, logically, inside of pipes, when people wanted water, now pipes are not disqualifiers because pipes are not receptacles. They want to get the water from point A to point B, but they never want to hold on to the water, so it's not considered handled by humans. But sometimes pipes get holes in them, or sometimes people on purpose will dig out holes in pipes. Why would one dig out a hole in a pipe on purpose? So let's say there's rocks coming out from where the water is going through the pipe from point A to point B, and they want to filter out the rocks from that thing. So they make a hole in the pipe, and the water goes through. It takes the rocks with it. The rocks get caught in that hole, and the water comes out pure. Problem is, for our halacha, for the Rambam, for the mikvah, it now has a receptacle, and it's now considered a vessel. Let's see in halacha vav what he says. Or somebody dug out in a pipe, a place to collect the stones that are going through the pipe, that are rolling in the water. So they shouldn't come down with the water. So there was a guy wanted to get water from a river, from a stream, and he put a pipe to get the water from the stream to wherever he wants it to go, the mikvah or anything else. And in that pipe, he built a receptacle to collect the rocks. So if the pipe was made out of wooden pipe, right? There's different ways. It's PVC. You can make a plastic made out of wooden chaffer by culture. We made a little tiny hole to collect the rocks. Paisel, it's going to disqualify it. Should they call because all the water that's going down through this pipe, it's going through a pipe, and this pipe is made with, on purpose, a specific receptacle to catch the rocks. But the fact is, this pipe is made with a receptacle, and therefore the pipe is considered to be human intervention handled by humans, and that will disqualify the water. Even if you took the pipe and you attach it to the ground, you cemented it into the ground, you made it part of the ground. Now, ground, had the water just flown through a hole in the ground, someone cut out a long line in the ground, that wouldn't be a problem because ground doesn't become tummy. So he took the pipe that was already a pipe with a receptacle. So it's a vessel now because it has a receptacle. Attach it to the ground. Doesn't help you. The fact you attach it to the ground because it was a vessel before it was attached to the ground. Attaching it to the ground won't affect it. But even though you attached it and made it part of the ground after you made the receptacle, because the pipe before it was attached to the ground was considered already a vessel. No good. You attach the vessel to the ground, it's still a vessel, it's no good. But if you first cemented it into the ground, and then after it was part and parcel of the ground, cemented into the ground before it became a vessel, because it had no receptacle at that point yet, you then dug out a hole to collect the rocks in that pipe, so it won't disqualify it because when you turned it into a receptacle, it was already attached to the ground, and it's like, I guess, digging a hole in the ground, and therefore it doesn't disqualify it. However, if for some reason, I'm not sure why, if the pipe, probably just don't know enough about these halachas, if the pipe was made out of earthenware, then if you dug out the hole, I guess, if for some reason an earthenware pipe, it doesn't disqualify it with a small hole, as we've been talking about till now, unless it has a large enough hole to hold a revius, a certain amount of, I don't know what that is, 2-3 ounces of liquid in it, then an earthenware pipe will be considered disqualified and will be considered a receptacle. Now, he says, what happens, if the rocks and mud is going through a pipe that's bringing out water from a stream, it's eventually going to get filled up with mud or rocks. So what happens once that hole in the receptacle gets filled up? So there's no hole, there's no receptacle anymore in the pipe. Is the pipe still considered a vessel? So he says like this: if that hole that was in the pipe meant to collect rocks got filled up with rocks, that hole has rocks, not really closed up, still has a receptacle, even though it's so full, it's full with rocks inside that hole. The hole is still considered a hole, and therefore it's like the pipe has a receptacle. However, if dirt and rocks, I guess little rocks together, went in and literally sealed off that original receptacle, and they were compressed there, then it is kosher because that hole has been totally sealed with the mud and the dirt and the rocks. And it's almost like there is no receptacle there now. Now the pipe is considered a pipe without a receptacle, and the water that went through it that goes into the mikvah will still be kosher. Very interesting. Halacha Zayin. Let's continue right along. Go to Halacha Zayin. Talk about if someone had a sponge or a bucket. Now the sponge water, the unique case that we're talking about here, is that the sponge water never went back into the mikvah. So in other words, if you take a sponge and you put water in a sponge and you squeeze out the sponge in the mikvah, that's considered handled water. Or if you take a bucket and you fill up water in a bucket and then you empty the water in the bucket into the mikvah, that is considered like it was handled water and it's no good. Here we're talking about what you never emptied the water from the sponge. Somehow the water stayed in the sponge or the water stayed in the bucket, that only the bottom of the bucket touched the water. Then it's not a problem. Let's see, a sponge and a bucket that had the 3 lugan of mayim, the 35 ounces of handled water, which would disqualify a mikvah. That doesn't have 40 sayat for nothing. When they fell into a mikvah, but somehow the bucket had a very small top, maybe even had a cover on it. It was like a covered bottle. Let's say you had a covered bottle of soda. It was a 35 ounce bottle with a cover on it, or somehow the water stayed in the bottle, never came out. Then you took the bottle out of the disqualifying water, but since the water never went out, they didn't disqualify the mikvah. Because the problem is, if handled water falls into a receptacle, not a vessel that has handled water inside it, but the water itself has to fall into the mikvah in order to disqualify it, not a vessel or a sponge with water in it. As long as that water stayed in the sponge and stayed in the bottle, then that bottle with water, disqualifying water in it, won't cancel it out. He says a very interesting halach here. Someone has that this is somewhat now getting closer to some cases that are used. So in camp here, actually, where we're going to some of the camps, they go to the mikveh in lakes and so on. So they have this thing called a Mikva Boat in one of the Montreal camps I went to as a kid. What happens if they, you jump into the water, but let's say kids are not comfortable in the lake. So what if they build like a box in the lake? You build like a full box in the lake and people go to mikveh in the box. So by going to the mikveh in that box that's in the lake, you made like a pool inside a lake. So is that considered kosher or not? Is that considered part of the lake? Or did you now build a mikveh in a vessel, a large vessel, and now you're in your vessel, you're not considered like you're in the lake. So that's what he discusses in halacha. That's very interesting. Ashida va'ateva. There was a closet or a chest, large thing, shabayan, they were in the ocean. Ocean is really usually a good mikveh. You can't use these large boxes in the ocean if they're completely sealed off, unless there is a hole inside them, at least the size, as we said, of a drinking cover to a pouch, which is about 2 fingers, unless that hole's big enough opening that it's not totally closed off. You didn't totally seal off this back that's in the lake, in the ocean. From the ocean, there's some hole that's 2 fingers big, connecting the box to the ocean around it, then it's kosher. Sorry, let me just turn the sun as like here. If I can get a better angle here. However, if it was a sack or a basket in the sea, which had a lot of holes, then you could go to the mikveh. So an example of this would be like in the shalom mikveh that we put our vessels in. There's a netting. There's like a when you go shopping in the store, those holders that has a lot of holes inside there. It's not considered separate from the mikveh because there's so many holes in there. Of course, those will be considered like it's in the lake and will be kosher to use as a mikveh. And the same thing is, and my wife suggested this idea, and then I saw in the Rambam that it's correct. So if someone puts let's say they want to. Remember, we wanted to collect rocks that they shouldn't go into the mikveh. Let's say someone's getting water from a stream through a pipe. So they put a sack or a basket under the piping there, and the water goes through that filterage so that there shouldn't be any rocks in the mikveh. The water that goes through these different kind of sacks or baskets that create a filter, it doesn't disqualify it. It's not a problem. Hang on, let me just grab my here. Continuing right along. Pretty good angle in the sun over here. Okay. All right, let's continue right along. Hang on 1 second, guys. Okay. One more, next halacha test is another interesting case. So basically, a gistira is an item that the Rambam talks about that they would have, I guess, in the olden days. And that was that, let's say, someone had a large pot or something, and the pot broke. It wasn't usable anymore. They would use the bottom of it, like we do for a kiddush cup, the plate under a kiddush cup, to catch the wine that falls out of the cup. So they used to have these trays that they would catch any liquids that would fall out of the pot on top of it. So it's called a gistira. So this gistira had a lip around it. So it was a flat bottom, a large flat bottom to catch any liquids that fell out of the pot, but it also had a lip that went up around it. So listen what happened. Interesting story with this gistira tameya, and it wasn't pure. This gistira itself wasn't pure, and itself needed to go to the mikvah to become pure again. It was inside, this gistira was put inside a mikvah, but the lips of the gistira was protruding out of the mikvah water, so it never became pure. Had it fully been protruded and it fully submerged in the mikvah, then if it would have been fully submerged in the mikveh, then it would have become pure itself, but they never fully protruded it. Maybe it wasn't fitting or so on, whatever. The bottom line is the lips of this tray on the bottom were going up out of the mikveh. So the tray itself was impure. It was sticking out of the water. And they were maybe using this tray to put vessels in it, like to catch it, maybe shouldn't fall into the mikveh or so on. They were putting vessels inside of it in order to become pure in the mikveh. And this big tray was under it, maybe not to let them fall down into the mikveh. Tiaru Mitumasan, the vessels became pure. They're in the mikvah, submerged in the mikvah. Those vessels you put it on top of this gistra vessel, becomes pure because they're in the mikvah. But another problem is going to happen. When you lift it up to pull it out of the water, you're going to pull them out. And the problem is they're now in the ear space, in the water that's touching the gistra's ear space. Now the gistra is still impure. The gistra makes the water inside on top of it impure, and then that water will make the vessel impure, and then makes the vessels impure. So you have to make sure to first make your gistra pure, and then after your gistra is pure, to put the vessels on top of it and use it as a protection that the vessel shouldn't fall down, because if you don't, your vessels will go in the mikvah, they'll become pure. But as you take them out, if you'll pull the gistra up with them, the water in the gistra will then make the water inside it impure, and those waters will make the vessels impure. So that is one interesting case. And he brings a similar case with a very weird, like an unusual case. The guy had an oven in his house that was impure, an earthenware oven in his house that wasn't pure. And the problem with earthenware is that, remember, we learned in the halacha, in the original laws, that earthenware can never become pure. Even if you stick earthenware, is the one item that even if you stick it in a mikvah, it can't become pure. Mikvah doesn't help an earthenware become pure. Okay. So, but here was a funny case. So somehow in this guy's house where his oven was, a river all of a sudden started coming out from his oven. And here you have a river stream, which is pure water coming through a impure item, which the river itself can't make the oven pure. So you're going to kind of have like a paradox. On one hand, you have pure waters that you're toiveling, and on the other hand, you're inside an oven, you're touching an oven which is impure. So let's see what happens. So to a river that goes out from under an oven, tell me that's impure. And he went to the mikvah. He went to the mikvah. So hutar, he is pure because he went to the mikvah. Now we learned that a vessel, an earthenware vessel, although it stays impure, cannot make a person impure by being inside the airspace of an earthenware vessel. It's just a rule. But the only thing you can make impure is his hands. But Yadav Tmeya, his hands are impure. From being within the airspace of the oven. So on one hand, you're pure, but the problem is, as soon as you leave the mikvah, you're still in the airspace of the impure oven, and therefore your hands will become impure. The only way to get out of it is the water goes out above the stream somehow is high enough from the oven, where his hand space will, when it leaves the mikvah, will already be outside the airspace of this oven. So your hands were out of the oven when he went to the mikvah, because the earthenware vessel always stays impure. So as long as unless when you leave that mikvah, your hand is already out of the airspace of the earthenware oven, your hands will stay impure, though your body will become pure, because the mikvah doesn't, the earthenware oven's airspace doesn't have enough power to make you impure. Your whole body, it just has enough power to make your hands impure, which are laws we learned somewhere else. Hang on one more second. I'm sorry, guys. Let me just pause this. All right. We have 4 halachas left in this case. 4 interesting halachas that take place. Okay. What happens if someone had a barrel full of water that wasn't kosher for a mikvah, that was handled water, that a person handled it? Chavis mali mayim, a barrel full of water, shenafel liyam, but it fell into the ocean. So now, afilu liyam agadol, even to the great ocean. So it was a different, and one of the commentaries on the Rambam want to say it was a different kind of water in the ocean it fell in. So let's see, it's very salty water. This is more like lake water, or vice versa. The texture, the kind of water that was in the barrel that was non-kosher for a mikvah fell into a large river, a large ocean, the Amagad, the Mediterranean Sea. And somebody went to the mikvah in the barrel. Also, very interesting. The mikvah does not count for him because the water in the barrel, which is not kosher, which he went to the mikvah in the barrel, never really mixes with the water of the ocean, and therefore his mikvah water, which he went in, which clearly was distinctly different than the general water he was in, although the two waters are touching since they're so different than each other, and he went to the mikvah in a barrel that's in the ocean, and that water in the barrel was not kosher because it was handled. Therefore, his mikvah won't be kosher even though it's in the ocean. And it's impossible that it retained, as long as in that barrel it retained the original 3 lugim of the kind of water that were handled in there. And as new ocean water comes in to the original water in there, it's going to have those three original lugim of at least three lugim of the original non-kosher water, and that will keep on disqualifying the new waters that come into the barrel. The kika shel truma shenafel l'sham, or a loaf of truma that's shenafel l'sham that fell in nitva v'mayim ashuvim will become impure. Shadei hamayim oimdim sham, because the waters of the original barrel, since they're distinct and different, and they stay in that barrel, even though the barrel's in the ocean. Since the ocean doesn't move, the waters are not flowing back and forth. They're pretty much stagnant. The original water in the barrel will stay not good for a mikvah and won't be nullified to the waters around it. So let's say you had such a barrel that was by a stream, and stream is very different. It's not stagnant. The waters move very fast and continue to move. Since the waters that's going into this barrel, it keeps on switching. The original water is for sure not there anymore, because streaming is pouring into waters and the old waters go out and new waters are constantly going in. You could use that barrel then as a mikveh, because the stream is not stagnant and will for sure push out the original waters completely, and it will be a kosher mikveh. Halacha yidaleh. Four more halachas left. Mayim she'uven shahi b'tzad mikveh. Let's say here it talks about a story where there was drawn handled water that was next to a mikveh. Afal pi shamayim lo yigib b'mei mikveh. Now you had two holes next to each other, one a kosher mikveh and one a non-kosher mikveh. They were right next to each other. They will not disqualify each other. Lo yipaslu b'nei she'ki mikveh samach l'mikveh. Because it is like a mikvah next to a mikvah, and it's not a problem. Even though the waters are touching, it's fine. The waters are not transferring one to the next. They're just next to each other. Your kosher mikvah is kosher, your non-kosher mikvah is non-kosher, even though they're touching. Place it as a mikvah, but if the pool of drawn water was in the middle of the mikvah, not next to it, then it's a problem. Then it could disqualify it. Three more halachas. Halacha 12. Interesting case. The kaisel b'neim. So there was a large pool, a high, tall pool next to a shorter pool, right next to each other. Okay. The kaisel b'neim, they had a wall going down between the two pools. Now the taller pool had kosher water had kosher water in it. But the lower pool, was filled of drawn water, humanly handled water, and therefore was not kosher. But there was a hole between the non-kosher mikvah and the kosher mikvah, these two holes, between the higher one and the lower one. Now, if I understand correctly, the kosher mikvah water never had the full 40 saw in it, because if it had the full 40 saw in it, nothing could disqualify it. So the problem is, it's not a full kosher mikvah with the full size needed, and it's touching next to it another pool that is non-kosher water. And I guess you're filling up the kosher water with more and more kosher water, but the whole time it's touching right next to it a mikvah that's non-kosher. The problem is, if there's a big enough hole between the non-kosher mikvah and the kosher mikvah, which in that hole could hold shleisha lugim, the 35 ounces that will disqualifying that's human handled water that will disqualify from mikvah water. So it's the problem is that water on the side of these two pools will be as if it's in the middle of the pool, not next to it. So it won't be considered a pool touching a pool, which that the mikvah touching a non-kosher mikvah, which the mikvah will stay kosher. It is considered the way the mikvahs are set up, and I'm actually not sure why. The mikvah next to a mikvah will be as if that hole that holds the size, as we're going to see now in the next halacha, of enough ounces of disqualifying water to render the kosher mikvah disqualified. That will be make the mikvah not kosher. How big does that hole have to be that's touching the kosher mikvah in order for it to be 35 ounces? It depends. How big that hole is depends on how big the mikvah is. That the non-kosher mikvah is. If the non-kosher mikvah was 40 saw, it has to be 100, one of 320 for that pool. But if it was smaller, it had to be one of a mimea v'shishim of 120 to the brecha. If you basically let's go further. And based on the calculations, that basically I saw, if you do the math, I did it before, but I'm not going to do it over right now. that a saw is 6 kabin and a kav is 4 lugim, it comes out that the way you divide the numbers is that's the size that has a disqualifying amount of water inside it. Shleisha mikvah, it's the last one. This is a little easier to understand. There were 3 mikvahs, zebetzadza, one next to another. 3 holes, 3 cavities with water in them. 3 mikvahs next to each other. Each one has exactly 20 saw in that hole. Exactly. One of them, of the 3 mikvahs, the one to the side, a side mikvah, had drawn water, handled water. The other the tavla, and 3 people went in and toiveled in those 3 holes. Shlashta all together. Now what happens is when people go into mikvahs, the water starts to rise. As all 3 people went into all 3 cavities, the water of all 3 rose and they all touched each other. So now you have 3 mikvahs, 2 of them have 20 saw of kosher water, and one of them has 20 saw of non-kosher water. And they all touch together. All the waters are kosher. And all the people that went into the mikvah, all 3 are pure. Because now, once all the waters rise and they touch, you have Charei Nasa Kol Shishim Saw, because a total of all 3 mikvahs together, you have 60 saw. And Arbaim Kshedim, 2 of them are kosher. So 2 times 20 is 40 saw. So you have enough kosher water to make a full kosher mikvah. Zebetzad zeh, the Einamayim Ashuvim place in the mikvah, and the 20 of disqualifying waters won't disqualify it. Sheyesh by Arbaim, because since you have already the magical number of necessary of 40, like we explained, so that's only works if the non-kosher mikvah was to the side. But if the non-kosher mikvah was in the middle, then it's a problem. If the non-kosher mikvah was in the middle, and the 3 guys went into the mikvah at the same time. And they rose and they attached the water. The mikvahs will be non-kosher, because when the 2 kosher mikvahs rose, they right away touch the middle water, which is a non-kosher water, and that will separate the 2. Because since the non-kosher water split between the 2 kosher ones never connected right away, and therefore there's not 40 saw there, and therefore the mikvah will be non-kosher. That is the end, my friends,